So, fat veins, hot springs and breccias. GBM has been a great company to work for, and we've got some great ground. Standard disclaimer, you can have a look at that on the website if you want to. There we go. So before I get underway, I'd just like to pay tribute to my friends and colleagues, team at GBM, Steve Nano, and who's here from Global Ore Discovery, Greg Morrison, Eagle Drilling, Brian and Sally Forgan, and the guys from Intertek in Townsville, Anto Wilson. So GBM, who are we? We are a junior explorer and a producer, a small producer, with a real focus on Eastern Australia. We have a team of successful and experienced mining industry professionals that have been involved in some very successful companies over the years. GBM itself, over the last couple of years, has had some wonderful success. 400% increase in contained, in gold JORC resources. We added the exciting Twin Hills and Yandan projects to our portfolio. In addition, a successful joint venture with Malmesbury and some non-core asset disposals. So focusing GBM into what is our key project, the Drummond Basin. At the moment, we have approximately 4,500 square kilometres of tenure, and we've put together 1.6 million ounces of JORC resources. We aim to grow that resource base to 2 to 3 million ounces and hopefully head towards production. Planned in-ground resource spend over the next 12 months, at least $7.5 million, and really focusing on deposits that we already own, but looking at near mine regional exploration. We are operating in Queensland, so safe mining jurisdiction and a low sovereign risk. Drummond Basin, this is GBM's flagship gold project. As I said before, quite a significant tenement position, 7,500 square kilometres. 13 epithermal gold systems, and there's not too many juniors around that can lay claim to having 13 epithermal gold systems. Very high potential for new discoveries and to increase and upgrade the resources at each of those, but I'll show you 3 of those through this talk. 1.6 million ounces of gold in the Drummond, broken up between our 3 main projects, Mount Coolin project over here, Yandan project over here, and Twin Hills project down here. So 330,000 ounces at Mount Coolin, spread across Koala, Eugenia, and Glen Eva, 520,000 ounces at Yandan, and 760,000 ounces at Twin Hills. Drummond Basin discovery history. Drummond Basin is Australia's preeminent epithermal gold terrane. Basin hosts a variety of low sulfidation epithermal styles of mineralisation. It's not just Pajingo style veins. And has produced 4.5 million ounces of gold. First significant discovery at Koala, Mount Coolin in 1913, followed up in the 80s with discoveries at Pajingo and Wirrallee, which led to an exploration boom in the Drummond between the 80s and the 90s. But since that time, there's been very little exploration, and much of the basin remains underexplored. Regional geology, Drummond Basin, 450 kilometre long, 150 kilometre wide, late Devonian to early Carboniferous sequence of volcanic and sedimentary rocks. Through the middle of the basin is the Anika Inlier, and that's a Neoproterozoic to lower Cambrian horst-like basement block of metavolcanics and metaseds. Drummond Basin itself partitioned into 3 cycles, with the bulk of the known mineralisation in cycle 1. Cycle 1 comprises andesite to rhyolitic volcanics and a variety of sedimentary rocks. Development of the Drummond Basin ceased in the middle Carboniferous Canimblin orogeny. You're welcome. Of key note here, cycle 1 volcanic rocks shown in green, And you can see that most of the known gold occurrences sit in these Cycle 1 volcanic rocks. Mount Coolin project. I'm going to focus in on the Glen Eva part of the Mount Coolin project. This is a photo of the Glen Eva pit, haul road back towards Mount Coolin itself, which sits off up in the background up here. Drill rig that we were drilling at the Mount Coolin pit in 2020. So Mount Coolin epithermal district. It's a large-scale epithermal field covering about 400 square kilometres with multiple known gold deposits. 330,000 ounces currently in JORC resources at Koala, Eugenia and Glen Eva. So Eugenia, Koala and Glen Eva. Glen Eva itself discovered in '93 by Dominion, following up anomalous drill results near what was interpreted to be Sinter, though we wonder if it actually is now. Ross Mining actually mined an open pit there, 24,000 ounces at 6 grams. Current resource, 78,000 ounces at 1.5 grams. Koala, over here, discovered in 1913, mining up to 1939 by open stope, produced 180,000 ounces at 18 grams a tonne. Ross Mining put an open pit on the end of those open stopes, produced another 53,000 ounces. Current resource of 128,000 ounces at 2.5 grams. These are 3 of the epithermal systems that I talk about when I said 13 epithermal systems, but there are a number of other prospects through here highlighted with these yellow dots that are epithermal systems in themselves. Verbena Sinter sitting down here. This is low sulfidation epithermal veins that crop out on the surface that have only been drilled at shallow levels. So quite a lot of prospectivity in this area. Next slide, please. Glen Eva. What is Glen Eva? Well, it's a large-scale, low sulfidation epithermal vein that we've now defined over a strike length of more than 1 kilometre and down to 300 metres depth. We've drilled, as GBM's drilled, 24 holes over 2020, 2021, and we got the first fat vein intercept in the Drummond outside of Pajingo, or at least as far as I know, it's the first fat vein intercept, and please tell me if it's not. A greater than 50 metre wide thick vein zone in hole 17 at Glen Eva. The veins are multi-stage with well-developed coliform and crustiform and breccia textures. So far, we've only tested a very small part of the system. And there is clear potential for additional discoveries along this structure, as I hope you'll see in the presentation, and significant resources to be found in this corridor. Some of the vein textures here from Glen Eva, beautiful coliform, crustiform bands, chalcedony quartz adularia here in yellow, and up here, moss textures in the core. Haven't seen much in the way of moss texture. This is one of our deeper holes, and that's the first place that we saw moss textures developed. So still quite high in the system. Change slide, please. Recent drilling, 2021 best drill results, 14.6 metres at 1.15. So not the high grades that we were hoping for, but plenty of gold sitting in here in a chute at Glen Eva pit. Though we haven't got excellent grades yet, it's clear this structure is mineralised, and there is very clear potential along this structure to find another high-grade chute. 6 holes intersected vein zones greater than 10 metres wide, with a 57-metre wide vein zone in hole 17. The vein itself is clearly vertically zoned from silica sulfide to chalcedony carbonate to crustiform coliform chalcedony. Typical of an epithermal system, but the upper levels of an epithermal system. We think the best part of the system is still below. The quartz vein textures and the geochemistry that we're seeing, it's also suggesting we're at the higher levels of the system. We see a gold arsenic antimony association with silica pyrite mineralization at higher levels. Underneath, we see gold silver telluride with moly and bismuth associated with crustiform coliform veins at deeper levels. We think the gold silver telluride suggests there's affinities to Krakow. So we don't want to just consider this as Pajingo being the only model. Real opportunities for chute-like ore bodies somewhere along this structure. Assay results and alteration vectors are coincident with the thickest part of the system here. So in brackets here are vein widths, gold grades at the front, alteration and vein textures are suggesting the system's getting better as you come down. The veins are getting thicker. We think there's a very clear target for testing down towards the end of this as a chute-like target. What does the vein look like in drill core? Here is hole 11, which we drilled in 2020. This was a bit of a revelation for us. We stepped out 400 meters from the end of the pit and drilled this hole and got an 8.9 meter intersection at 1.66 grams. But importantly, there were some high-grade pulses of mineralization sitting in this vein along beautiful little ginguro bands in the vein, right? This is an exciting epithermal style of mineralization with clear high-grade pulses. There is real opportunity for high-grade shoots to be along this structure, further down and further along strike. Hole 17, 57 meters of vein zone from 174 meters down hole. Banded jasperoidal chalcedony, illite, pyrite with the distinct gold arsenic antimony signature. And here's this banded mineralization with the gold arsenic antimony mineralization. Chalcedony, illite, adularia quartz with gold silver telluride. This is what that looks like. All the beautiful adularia sitting through there. Both of these intersections, both of these styles of mineralization have gold associated with them. So we're seeing multiple pulses of gold coming through at different times in the veins development. Multiple styles of vein development with brecciation and coliform and crustiform banding. This is a big system. The jasperoid is indicative of the top of an epithermal system, as we were suggesting before. And you can see here the veins just come out on the ground, and here's Mr. Nano having a look at the core as it's come out of the drill rig. Yeah. Next slide, please. So the Glen Eva vein interpretation, what do we think is going on? Well, detailed logging of vein textures in the drill holes, not just these holes, but some more holes, shows very clear changes in vein facies along strike and down plunge. To the southeast of the pit, the absence of sinter suggests that the vein system did not reach the paleo surface, but the top of the system is broadly marked by the hematite alteration, i.e. the jasperoid, that likely resulted from the interaction of groundwaters with rising hydrothermal fluids. The very thick intersection in hole 17 may have resulted from pooling of hydrothermal fluids underneath the rhyolite sill. The well-developed ginguro bands overprinting the breccia in hole 11 and predominantly silica matrix breccia in hole 14 demonstrate the variation in vein facies and suggest mineralization is likely controlled by steeply plunging ore shoots. Thus, that very clear target that I had on the long section. Next slide, please. So where do we think we sit in the overall epithermal system model? I'm sure you're all aware of the quartz textures veining model of Morrison. Here's the metals along the side. Here's a schematic for the various mineralization styles that we see in the Drummond Basin. For Glen Eva, we think we're sitting down here at this sort of level. The vein textures, the vein mineralogy, the style of veining itself all suggests the upper part of a fat vein system. Sinters are at Glen Eva are more likely to be some sort of silica replacement horizon than a sinter senu stricto. And in the pit at Glen Eva, we even see horsetailing of the vein as we're getting closer to the top of the system. As part of the Glen Eva exploration program, we undertook, with support from the Queensland Government CI grant, a 3D IP and then a 2D IP program over quite a substantial program over 66 line kilometres between Glen Eva and Eastern Silicious. Along the trend that we were considering as the Glen Eva Eastern Siliceous Trend, the GEES, that we saw as a very distinct mineralized corridor comprising mappable structures, geophysical anomalies, geochemical anomalies, and now very clear IP anomalies. As part of that, we then went out and wanted to find out what this quite high chargeable zone in the middle of the IP program was. And we drilled 3 holes, here, here, and here. And we got a surprise. Next slide, please. Hole 19 drilled into 163 meters of variable intensity carbonate base metal veining. Not a classic low sulfidation epithermal signature. Right. Here's some of the veins. And there were some quite significant zinc and lead grades. Not that this is a zinc or lead deposit, far from it. But not what we were expecting. So that's hole 19 there. There's that overall program, and we're just looking at the top part of that with this image here. This is a depth slice of chargeability for those 2 images. Glen Eva sitting over here, Eastern Siliceous is off down the bottom here. These 2 holes out this end intersected abundant disseminated pyrite, up to 7% over quite long intervals. Thus, we're interpreting this to be a concealed alteration halo of a larger hydrothermal system. We didn't see significant gold mineralization associated with that, very little gold associated with the base metals. Next slide, please. So how do we put all that together, right? We think that given the position of that IP chargeability anomaly in between Glen Eva and Eastern Siliceous, and the carbonate base metal veins and the pyrite, the elevated pyrite, we see that as a concealed alteration halo of a large hydrothermal system. We infer that the Glen Eva epithermal veining, the pyrite halo and the carbonate base metal veining to be part of a larger zoned system. Now this is early days, and this is of course subject to change as more information becomes available. With a zoned system with low sulfidation epithermal mineralization sitting outboard to the northwest and potentially even outboard in the other direction to the southeast at Eastern Siliceous with a carbonate base metal core. Not at all what we were expecting to find, but adding quite a different story to the Glen Eva system and quite a different story to what you usually get out of the Drummond Basin. So what's our forward plan? Glen Eva Eastern Siliceous remains a key target for GBM. It's a big system with existing resources that has the potential to host a major ore body. Our planned work will focus on coincident geochem, geophysical and structural targets, including that down dip shoot target at Glen Eva vein. And we're very pleased that we've had a lot of interest from companies that have had past discovery success in epithermal terranes, including some quite large companies. That's validating our exploration model at Glen Eva. A couple of the beautiful veins from Glen Eva, banded chalcedony and adularia there, and you've seen that one before with the adularia on the outside there. Okay, next slide, please. Moving on to Yandan. At the end of 2020, 2021, GBM acquired Yandan. We'll have a quick look through some of the drill results and then talk about the updated drill model, geology model. Here we are. This is our first drill hole at Yandan. East Hill, it just sits over the back here. Yandan main pit over in the distance. Next slide, please. So Yandan was discovered by WMC in '86 using stream sediments and soil geochemistry with initial drilling in '87. Ross Mining extracted approximately 365,000 ounces from heap leach and CIL plant between 92 and 98. In 2005, Straits Gold discovered the East Hill deposit with Yan 005 that returned 176 meters at 2.4 grams. That would have been a good day. Past and present resources, and I don't think this is as well appreciated as it should be, almost 900,000 ounces at Yandan. GBM acquired the deposit in 2020, and along with 520,000 ounces of resources, we also inherited substantial infrastructure, the existing mining lease, heap leach pad, water harvesting rights, power line to site, and an airstrip. Next slide, please. Prospectivity of Yandan. Why did GBM get into Yandan? Well, first of all, we recognised it as quite a substantial gold deposit. As I said, almost 900,000 ounces over a kilometre of strike. The historic focus at Yandan was really on oxide, with very little work looking for sulfide apart from that Straits work. Of real interest for us was the Yandan South, or Yandan Main and South deposits were strata-bound structurally controlled mineralisation, whereas the East Hill was more of a high-grade vein-style mineralisation with some sort of fault at depth. There wasn't any clear explanation for the relationship between these deposits, and there wasn't a clear explanation for the relationship between the fault at depth and mineralisation sitting here. This is a photo of some of the beautiful felted bladed textures from the veining down the bottom here at Yandan East. East Hill, 80 grams for that bit of core. Spectacular veins. Next slide, please. So in 2021, we undertook a 15-hole drill program for a little under 7,000 metres, really to look at whether the high-grade core of the deposit was real and explore the margins of the resource to see if there are any easy wins early on. We got some excellent assay results back. So yes, we confirmed that high-grade core, and yes, we did add some ounces around the margins of that resource, and I'll show you those in a minute. But some really spectacular results: 176 gram meters, 268 gram meters, so 111 meters at 2.4. Great results. Next slide, please. So here's the drilling that we did do. This is looking in a funny direction on the sections. Most of the other sections are looking the other way. This is just so you can see where the intersections are. So this is looking southeast. Block model sitting in there for mineralisation. Most of the results that we got back, some sitting above, but a lot of the results sitting below the existing resource. What was really interesting for us was that we got quite a substantial result sitting 100 metres below the resource. But even more interesting was this mineralisation sitting right down here, which appeared to be on the other side of that fault that bounded mineralisation. Next slide, please. So excellent results. Here's some of the beautiful vein textures that we see. So this was all in 1 metre that ran 23 grams. The veins themselves are not very big. The widest vein we got was about 2 metres and 2 metres width in drilling. Most of the veins are sort of 10 to 20 centimetres wide and form a sheeted vein system that comes off that fault like that. Well, not should, doesn't come off that fault. Sits like that with that fault at the base. But just some beautiful textures in here with bladed carbonate sitting down there, overprinted by coliform crustiform banding, and some beautiful blades sitting through there. Excellent grades. This overall interval ran 214 metres at 1.58. What was really important for us was that all of these vein textures were suggesting we're still at a high level in the deposit, despite some of the great grades that we were getting. Also of interest, some pyrobitumen kicking through some of the deposit. Petrology suggests that gold's actually associated with adularia rather than the pyrobitumen. I don't understand how significant that is to mineralisation yet, but quite interesting at Yandan. Another hole, hole 7 this time, more great grades intercepted through there. What I want to show you here is that the style of mineralisation changes as you go down hole. So A, B, and C, A, B, and C, sitting outboard at the top of the hole up here, well-developed silica pyrite, breccia. What I didn't appreciate when we started work at Yandan was just how voluminous the breccias are at Yandan. And that hadn't been included in the model, or at least a model that I'd seen. In the core of the system, here's one of these veins running 25 grams in this instance. Beautiful bladed carbonate replaced with chalcedony. So a variation from that to that as you go downhole or across from the outside of the system from out here coming down into the core of the system. Next slide, please. So yes, after the drilling, we realised that yes, the mineralisation was real, but we got to the point that I think a lot of the other guys that had worked on Yandan before had gotten to, and that was, well, where do we go next? What we decided to do was undertake a very detailed review of the core that we'd drilled, right? So the key purpose of the review was to evaluate the potential for more and better mineralisation. The focus was on defining the hydrothermal system. So not looking at the nitty-gritty necessarily, but really what's the overall pattern to the system? How do the veins change? Not on a centimetre basis, but on a 100 or tens of metres basis. What does the alteration do? We chose one section to do a lot of work on, and that was the section with most of the recent drilling. But we also looked at holes from across the deposit to confirm what we were seeing on that section was correct. We defined and mapped stratigraphy, alteration, mineralisation and brecciation in broad units, not nitty-gritty, plus recorded the contact types between the units. Were they intrusive, were they faulted, were they brecciated, and any major structures. The key questions that we had were still some of those questions from before we drilled. What was the relationship between Yandan main, south and east? Was the current geological model correct? So here's the model that we had before we started drilling. Sitting down here, centre, quite steeply dipping. Was that real? Is that real? Is it really that steeply dipping? This is St. Anne's Formation sediments. This is andesite. But then underneath it, previously we had interpreted that there was Eucalyptus Formation, so a much older rock package. But then over here, we've got St. Anne's sediments juxtaposed directly against Eucalyptus. Well, where's the andesite gone? There's a question itself there. And then how does the abundant brecciation fit into the story? And most importantly, what's the relationship between mineralisation and this fault here? Previously interpreted as a listric fault, but you'll see that I'm not referring to it as a listric fault in this presentation. So first up, stratigraphy. The centre itself is clearly interbedded with reworked hydrothermal eruption breccia and sediments with hydrothermal components. Given that, the dip of the centre, and I'm not suggesting that very steep dip is correct, but the dip of the centre suggests that the system has been rotated from its original position. Right? The volcanic facies, contacts within the stratigraphy actually define something that looks like a graben, and I'll reference that a little later on, but we've got a lot more work to do on that at this stage. And sediments with hydrothermal components intersected underneath the fault. The units below the basal fault, well, they had a dip that was broadly consistent with the regional dip. They have limestone and marl interlayers and possible hydrothermal components. So rather than being Eucalyptus Formation, much older, we actually think they're St. Anne's Formation. So here we are above the centre, up at 141 metres in hole 2. Here we are below the fault, down at 380 metres in hole 5, effectively the same rocks. Next slide, please. The centre is clearly interbedded with a hydrothermal eruption breccia, or at least reworked hydrothermal eruption breccia. The limestone and marl, there's limestone and marl present below the centre. So this is suggesting that the centre was deposited at surface. This is reworked breccia sitting up here. So here's the centre down here, and then this unit up through here has components, has hydrothermal components within it. These are clasts of centre and clasts of vein and clasts of altered andesite. This is a critical unit for us. When we first drilled this hole, this was our second hole on the project, none of the geologists on site recognised this for what it was or its importance. And I'll show you why it's so important in just a moment. It's very important, though, not just to think about the centre, but think about units with hydrothermal components in them. Next slide, please. Here's some of the stratigraphy. This is what the rocks look like at Yandan. andesite agglomerate, andesite tuff, andesite lavas, alteration over the top of the andesite lava, and then some of the tufaceous sandstones that we see. Next slide, please. So here we go. This is possibly the most important revelation from the drilling that we did. Here is that unit that I was showing you just before of the reworked eruption breccia, so a conglomerate if you like, now above the centre. This is what we drilled below the centre, and it had 1 metre at 3.69 in it. Would you just arrow forwards, please? And here's what produced the gold. Bladed epithermal veins. Right, so we've got clasts of epithermal vein below that fault. Would you mind going backwards for a sec? I can't stress enough the importance of going back and doing the relog after the program was finished. When we drilled this hole, none of the geologists recognised the importance of that metre of drill core because we hadn't seen those rocks before and we were seeing hundreds of metres of breccia. When we drilled this hole, this was hole 8, this was months after we saw this. So no one put the two together. And it wasn't until we went back, saw this, understood what it was, and then said, well, I've seen this before and guess where it is. Right? Critical when and I don't have to tell the audience here, but hopefully there's some students listening in. Critical when you finish the drill program, go back and look at the core again, assay results in hand. Next slide, or next two, please. What I'd like you to focus on this slide, drill holes, assay results, doesn't matter the grade, down one side in colour, hatch pattern, don't worry about what the hatch means, just hatching is brecciation. You can see how much brecciation there is associated with mineralisation. It is very extensive. It is intimately related to the mineralisation. You can't, if you have a model for mineralisation here, you have to include the brecciation in the model. Because this wasn't, or at least I hadn't seen this in models previously, some questions about whether or not key eruption breccia conduits had actually been recognised in drilling. We now need to go back and look at some of the old drilling and see if we can find some of these key conduits. And the brecciation is clearly offset by post-mineral faults. Here's a fault coming through here, cutting the top of that system. I'm going to show you a bit of drill core from right there where that breccia cuts. Next slide, please. So here's that point. Here's the breccia. There's the fault. So clearly, mineralisation is offset by post-mineral structures. Some more brecciation here. This is a tuff brecciated with silica pyrite infill. Makes the boundaries pretty hard to pick, but some spectacular core. Next slide, please. And then different style of breccia, silicified host, silica pyrite infill, silica veins, silica matrix. So this brecciation is going on when the veins are forming. Next slide, please. Here's the limestone or marl that sits below the centre. This is it here. You can see that it's brecciated, and here's clasts of it in what is demonstrably hydrothermal breccia. Mineralisation at Yandan. We classified it into 6 types, and you can see the distribution of the veins here, no surprise, matches the distribution of gold. The key thing out of this, all of these vein types that we saw suggested that we were in the upper part of the system. We have not seen the bottom of the system yet. We're in the upper part of the system. Here's what some of the mineralisation looks like. Just another look at some of these silica pyrite, hydrothermal breccias and shadow networks and infill veins. Here we got a vein breccia coexisting. Next slide, please. And here's the biggest vein that we drilled, 2.1 metres at 20 grams. Beautiful bladed textures. But the vein itself, you can see, has been brecciated. The veins are forming, brecciation is going on, all as part of the one system. So where do we sit at Yandan? Well, clearly defined mineralisation zonation maps out the system pretty well when you go and look at the drill core. The vein textures and compositions suggest we're in the upper part of the system. Mineralisation is clearly offset by post-mineral faults, but the basal fault has likely cut off the system. The missing part of that system, given that we're in the upper part, is likely to have better grades overall. And not only that, in these sorts of epithermal systems, generally the quantity of gold, the amount of ounces, is lower in the top part of the system. So we might actually find a lot more ounces and much better grades underneath. So where do we think we are at East Hill? Well, we think this is effectively an accurate representation or cartoon. Well, perhaps I shouldn't say accurate. This is our interpretation of East Hill. A breccia coming through the middle, veins at the base of that breccia, some veins within that breccia. Oops, back one, please. Hydrothermal eruption breccia out the top with sinters and reworked hydrothermal eruption breccia over the top. What do we see as the potential here? Well, the potential is this, of course, with much better grades. We're already seeing up to 200 grams or even higher in some of those little veins, 200 grams across a metre. Pretty exciting as to what could be underneath. Next slide, please. So what sort of system is it? Look, as soon as I saw this I thought was a dead ringer for Yandan. I'm sure most of you have seen this before. This is a hot spring style epithermal system. Sinter and hydrothermal eruption breccia at Yandan, underlain by hydrothermal crackle and shatter breccia, that's sitting up in here. Breccia is overprinted by chalcedonic veins, coliform crustiform banding. Veins are more prominent deeper in the system, so coming down through here. And then potential for the veins to get even better grade and more mineralisation at depth. But here's where I think the faults come through. And we thought there was a graben there. We're not 100% yet, but it would make sense that something like this was localised in a graben. Still to do work on that though. Next slide, please. Are there other deposits like this in the world? Well, here's an example from the United States. This is Golden Promise, 2 bonanza veins directly underneath the hydrothermal eruption breccia. So center out the top, extrusive breccia, intrusive breccia sitting down here, and then the veins sitting down here. And this is what our target is at Yandan. And I think we've got a bloody good chance of finding something very significant down there. So forward plan, look, we need to go back and confirm that model now. We need to define the offset on that basal fault, and I think we've got a very good opportunity to do that because there is something that I think might be a marker bed. I'd like to use some geophysics to try and map additional structures. I'm not sure whether we'll see the veins. Maybe we'll see fat veins with the geophysics. But also, if it is down on the andesite under there, map what could be a substantial pyrite halo. And then once we've done that, of course, we'd like to go and drill test it. Just some beautiful bladed carbonate. This is predominantly carbonate still not replaced from hole 6, I think it was. And I don't know if you can quite see that here, but this is all coliform banded, but with pyrite on either side of this vein. Okay, Twin Hills. I'm not going to talk about Lone Sister. I'm just going to talk about 309. That's where we've done most of our work so far. Well, I'd like to, it's still early days for us with Twin Hills, and I'd like to run through with you geological observations that we've made. Very happy for comments. We're in the process of building a geological model. So you see something that you don't agree with, yell out. Twin Hills comprises 309 and Lone Sister deposits and numerous prospects in the tenement package. Gold first recognised by Matana in '87. BMA gold extracted 23,000 ounces at 9.2 between 2006 and 2007. And then sent that 280 kilometres to Rishton, which is up near Charters Towers, when gold was $700 an ounce. Between then and now, sporadic work, geophysics, geochemistry and drilling, not very much. There's been quite a strong focus on geophysics and the geochem has been ignored. I think we've got a bit of work to do with the geochem. Recent focus, though, has been on tracking ore rather than considering Twin Hills as a standalone proposition. And I think that is where the real game is at Twin Hills. So 309 up here, Lone Sister down here, about 7 kilometres apart. Key things from here, cycle 1 volcanics coming through here. Some of this down here was actually granite, where people spent a lot of money drilling, and that was probably the wrong thing to be doing. Next slide, please. So acquired by GBM in 2022, excellent acquisition cost, very competitive per ounce of gold. Substantial infrastructure, mining leases are there, portal and decline, sheds and camp, and right next to a sealed highway. It's nice to drive on bitumen all the way to work. Current combined resource, 760 odd thousand ounces. Both deposits remain open, down dip, along strike. Lone Sister surprisingly open up dip as well. Excellent potential to extend existing resources, as you'll see. And we have quite a substantial package of ground around deposits. As with a lot of deposits that haven't been understood well in the past, there is a plethora of interpretations out there. 309 deposit geological setting, previously interpreted everything from a prograding alluvial fan to diatreme Mar complex to phreatomagmatic breccia in a graben. It's been called fault controlled, breccia controlled, epithermal, components of mesothermal, and some people have even gone as far to state that it definitely isn't epithermal. Most of the geological features in the deposit, I think, were recognised. When you read through the old reports and then look at what's in the core, people saw everything, but they haven't interpreted it in the right way, or at least the way that I think is the right way. GBM currently reviewing geology in detail, and we will put out a detailed geological model. It's quite a fascinating deposit. But some observations. First up, it's demonstrably an epithermal system. There's classic epithermal vein textures, and there's a centre on surface. This is suggesting a very high level of emplacement, the centre. Overall host rocks, and I think this is where people start to get confused with the rocks to start off with, calcareous and perhaps slightly carbonaceous siltstones. There is a thick package of polymicted milled matrix breccia that overlies the siltstone and hosts much of the gold mineralisation. There is a sequence of variably oriented, discontinuous, fine to medium grained volcanosedimentary units, and I'll show you what these are. And this is where people, I think, have gotten really confused in the past. And these are interfingered with the milled matrix breccia, but we'll have a look at those shortly. I'm just going to call them volcanosedimentary units to avoid any connotations for now. Volumetrically minor hydrothermal eruption breccias and hydrothermal breccias as well. Mineralisation shows steep and shallow trends that broadly correlate with specific rock types and the overall regional structural architecture. And mineralisation occurs as a stockwork breccia of quartz, chalcedony fluorite, pyrite adularia veins, and later chalcedony pyrite electrum veinlets. Mineralisation is not a fat vein like Bujingo, and I think that's where the earlier workers had struggled with mining it. So the overall system host is a well-bedded, well-laminated, calcareous, weakly carbonaceous siltstone with abundant carbonate nodules. Here it is here. Interestingly, there's no evidence of metamorphism and limited brecciation at the contact with the overlying milled matrix breccia. No clear hydrothermal alteration associated with the breccia either, though it is hydrothermally altered by later events. The andesite present at Lone Sister is not seen at 309, and at the moment we suspect the andesite is below this unit further down. Next slide, please. So here's the milled matrix breccia. This is a colour photo. This is not a black and white photo. This is what the rocks will end up looking like after they've been heavily silicified. It's a thick package of polymicted milled matrix breccia overlies that siltstone. Classed size and percentage looks like it decreases upwards, broadly decreases upwards, but still working on that. Initial work suggests that the contact between the milled matrix breccia and the underlying siltstones appear to be parallel to the overlying sinter. So this might have been laid down on the siltstones rather than an intrusive contact. Still working on that. And this hosts the bulk of the gold mineralisation. And then here's the first photo of these variably oriented discontinuous volcanosedimentary units. And this is a pretty good photo because this shows quite a variety of these units all in the one section. Through the middle here, through there, down to about there, is the milled matrix breccia. This is one of these volcanosedimentary units. Almost looks like chert. In some instances, it looks like a silica gel almost that's been injected. This is a tuff, if you like, looks like a tuff. Up here, looks more like a sandstone. Next slide, please. In detail, here's some more photos of these units over here. Previously logged as conglomerate, or a sort of a class-supported breccia. We think this is probably a pebble dike or a series of pebble dikes, and I'll show you why shortly. Tuffs with some beautiful structures in these tuffs and some beautiful grading. And then through here, this is trachyte, peperitic margin, suggesting these rocks were wet when this was emplaced. Okay. Next slide, please. So here's these pebble dikes, and you can see at first glance they appear parallel to bedding. But when you look in detail, there's the bedding there, running up through there. These pebble dikes transect bedding. The matrix from here, so this is here and this is here, you can see is perpendicular to the bedding in that sample. And in fact, not only is it perpendicular to bedding, but the matrix in here actually runs out along these fracture planes as well. And then some of the quartz veins follow those same trends. Pretty cool. So these things are cross-cutting stratigraphy. Next slide, please. Perhaps a tuffosite dike for this one. These large white fragments in this dike are clasts of pumice. They're not feldspars. The small white things in here probably are feldspars. You can see along the margins of this dike, some of these things have been rotated. So this margin has been fluidized. This is all chalcedony, fluidizing the margins, around the margins of this dike, up the middle of this dike, along this side of the dike. And here's the milled matrix breccia out here. Here it is in here. So there's that tip of that dike, if you like. These things are intimately associated with gold mineralization. Not necessarily bringing the gold in, but part of the same system. Also part of the same system, we see a suite of volumetrically minor breccias. This one over here, this is most likely a hydrothermal eruption breccia. In geometry, this is subvertical, quite close to the interpreted paleo surface. Potentially has clasts of mixed oxidation state in it, though this may be alteration related. And then we see classic hydrothermal breccias with quartz, chalcedony, and fluorite influence. Okay. So then we get into mineralization. So we're getting a picture of the system of you know, the host rocks are volcanic, but we're probably not sitting within a vent. We're probably off to the side of the vent. We think that we're in a wet environment, and we might be underwater, but certainly the rocks that are being mineralized are wet. And we've got a series of these volcanosedimentary units, tuffs, tuffosites, something like that, that occur or are injected through these units. And they're bringing silica in with them. And then we see the veins. And the veins are absolutely fascinating. Here's this complete vein, and here's either side of it. So this section here is actually just around the core there, and then we're looking at this section in here. This vein, as it's come in, has gone around the clasts. Right? On this side of the vein, through here, it looks like it's just assimilated with the wall rock. We interpret this to reflect vein emplacement into a partially unconsolidated host. So these things are wet breccias that haven't been consolidated yet, and they're getting hydrothermal fluids pumped into them, and veins are forming where the fluid pressure is strong enough to jack these things open, but at a very high level. Here's some more examples of why we think we're in that sort of environment. These clasts all got quartz veins around them. In detail, if you look in 3D, you can see the veins sort of joining between. But quite clearly, they're picking out the margins of the clasts as a place to deposit silica. Down here, maybe geyserite pebbles is our interpretation on this. Could also be replaced pumice. But then this looks like geyserite as well. So a breccia forming, a geyser like breccia forming in soft sediment. Next slide, please. And then we also see beautiful, beautiful fluorite veins. We think this is probably some of the earliest stages of mineralization now. So early stage of mineralization, fluorite, chalcedony, with a little bit of gold coming in with it. Once again, you see how irregular some of these vein margins are. Look at that through there, right? Beautiful fluorite developing, big crystals being formed within, like somehow growing within this, right? It's not growing in open space in this rock. This might be more a case of open space fill, but beautiful bladed textures. So the blades that we're seeing at Twin Hills are blades after fluorite. They're not blades after carbonate. There may be some blades after carbonate, but there's a lot of blades after fluorite. Next slide, please. As mineralization continues, so wet set with this wet breccia, having fluorine-rich fluids being pumped into it and producing veins. As those fluids evolve, those fluorite veins get wiped out, and you just see by chalcedony, and you just see this left over, so just bladed. But I think what's also going on is that the rocks actually progressively get silicified. This is probably sort of 5 to 10 type gram grades when we see this sort of material. And then as the system progressively develops, the rocks get very hard and you start to see real breccias, classic hydrothermal crackle breccias. And I assume that's just an evolving fluid. And this is up to sort of 50 grams at this stage. So evolving fluid producing all these features is how we're seeing this deposit. Next slide, please. And then towards the end of the system, when everything's gotten hard, the final pulses appear to be very high grade, bonanza type grades, 166 grams over half a metre, 129 grams over a metre, lots of visible gold coming through in little crackle type veinlets, probably electrum rather than pure gold. Next slide, please. So just to underline, this is not a Pajingo style system. This is a highly irregular vein stockwork. Initial stages developed in potentially unconsolidated host rock. You can imagine fluids going everywhere. And then later stages as this thing solidifies, breaking through in a breccia, if you like. It's a great bulk mining target. Next slide, please. Also of interest, at least some of the controls in the deposit appear to be related to those volcano-sedimentary units. You can see layers in the ore body that correlate well with these sorts of layers. So the Twin Hills ore body, I think, it's a 3D complex problem. There are 3D controls on the distribution of mineralization. There are subvertical pipes, and then there's a horizontal component to the mineralization, and the horizontal component relates to fluid flow around these things. I'm not suggesting that they're bringing gold in with them, but I suspect that perhaps gold's being pooled here for permeability or competency factors. So where are we sitting in the system? Probably right up the top here. Once again, we see the centers, we see the breccias. We're not seeing any of this. All the textures are very high level, likely precipitated in a wet environment close to the surface. Next slide, please. Quick look through the Twin Hills drilling results, simply because they're so spectacular. 15 holes we drilled for 6,000 metres. Results generally either reflect previous mineralisation or provide an upgrade. Several new significant intersections. Real potential to grow the resource, as I hope you'll see as we go through. And resource boundaries not yet effectively defined. Here are our top 5 hits from the drilling program. There's some great numbers coming out of Twin Hills. This is a quality deposit, or out of 309. This is a quality deposit. Next slide, please. Just to run through some of the highlights. This is all of the intersections greater than 20 gram meters, I should say, from the recent drill program. Best intercept, 162 meters at 2.65. 12 intercepts greater than 100 gram meters. Individual assays up to 166 grams a ton. Visible gold as electrum. multiple high-grade intersections outside known resources, 19 metres at 5.2. That was above the resource. High grades open along strike, 49 metres at 5. Excellent intersections from close to surface, 148 metres at 1.1 from just 26 metres. Real potential for open pit here. Next slide, please. Most holes returned individual assays greater than 10 grams a tonne. Multiple holes returned assays greater than 30 grams per tonne. High-grade shoots through the deposit, some nice cream for mining. The results are showing this is a high-quality deposit. 309 is a high-quality deposit. High-grade gold mineralisation intersected immediately outside the existing resource model, both above and below, suggests there's still quite a lot of scope to grow this resource. And we're seeing good intersections, many better than previous holes within the resource. There's real potential for us to add significant ounces here. Open pit potential, and of course, potential for mining in the near term. Right? Here's a beautiful vein, almost 3 ounces in here. This is 0.7 metres. This is the entire 0.7 metre intersection. It runs 89 grams. And this is one of these tuffosites, let's call them, through there. The more porous unit in here, you can see, likely has the gold mineralisation in it, and the finer grain unit is effectively an aquitite. Some of the drill holes, just having a look at some of these holes, mineralisation sitting outside here, 20 metres at 2 grams sitting down there, 2 metres at 20 grams sitting down there, mineralisation sitting above the resource up there. Note how close this resource comes to the surface. Next slide, please. Here we are, hole 5 that got 49 metres at 5.18. No drilling out here at all. This is completely open. And this is the hole with this beautiful electrum in it. Hole 9, what was really exciting about this hole was that it was the hole that drilled furthest to the south so far of any of the drilling, historical drilling included. And we drilled 200 metre wide zone of silicification, brecciation and variable veining. Now, we didn't get much of the, we didn't get any in the way of gold mineralisation down there. Here's what it looked like. Mill matrix breccia persevering most of the way down this hole. Beautiful salmon coloured adularia and purple fluorite. I suspect what we're seeing is we're moving away from the core of mineralisation, so it's not having the silica overprints. That's why we're seeing these beautiful pink and purple colours. But this system is still continuing, and there is scope for other pods sitting down here. All of the fluids are still down here. This was great, 19 metres at 5 grams above the resource. Down here, mineralisation open at depth. Next slide, please. So, Twin Hills forward plan. Look, this is the clear priority for GBM in the near term. We're going to complete the geology models for 309 and Lone Sister. We're going to use those geology models as a basis for a new resource model. Hopefully, we'll get this done towards the end of the year. I'm fairly confident this is going to be an upgrade. Back into 309 and Lone Sister to test those extensions as soon as we can. And then we want to kick off the regional work around 309. This is actually a piece of drill core from 309, just with beautiful cubic fluorite crystals. So in summary, last slide, GBM has 3 very significant projects in the Drummond Basin with clear paths forward and excellent potential for major discoveries. 13 epithermal systems, possibly more, very substantial land holding. Already we've put together 1.6 million ounces in JORC resources. Outstanding results from Twin Hills. It's a very exciting project, real potential to make this bigger, and a great opportunity for mining in the reasonably near term. We are driving these projects forward with quality geological work. We're using industry-leading consultants, and we're getting the guys on the ground to help us focus on the geology. Few, if any, Australian juniors have a comparable position to us with sort of projects that we have. And there's real potential for GBM to become a mid-cap producer in the not too distant future. I just put these slides up here because these are some of the other projects that I didn't talk about today. Beautiful coliform, crustiform banding at Koala. And here we go, Eugenia. This is a dead ringer for the top of East Hill at Yandan. You could swap this core around and you wouldn't know any different. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mark. Do we have any questions from the floor before we check out people from home? Yep, one for Doug Young.
Yeah, Mark, the fluorite and that you were showing in one of the previous slides, which is unmineralized, do you have a geochemical print on that which is different to the mineralized zone? And going back to Eva, you had a intersection there of 50 meters of a vein, and I think your quoted intersection was about 17 meters. Once again, do you have a geochemical imprint on what's mineralized and what's not?
We haven't gone down the path of doing a lot of work on the geochemistry yet. We've been focused on trying to resolve that stratigraphy to understand the setting of the deposit. That's very clearly on the radar for us. I did some initial work and was surprised at the lack of magmatic influence on the gold mineralization. There's no clear moly, tellurium, tungsten, any of the classic magmatic indicators, even though there's clearly quite a lot of magmatic input. And I suspect that's because the hydrothermal fluids, wherever they're coming from, and probably from a magma source not too far away, are being swamped by meteoric waters. The fluorite's quite interesting for me because you know, what sort of fluids are carrying that, and what does that mean for the acidity? Is there hydrofluoric acid, for example, eating some of that rock, and is that why we're seeing some of those textures? To answer your question, no, we haven't done that yet, Doug, but it's certainly on the radar.
And what about texturally?
I don't see, I suspect that most of the fluorite probably isn't mineralized, or if it's mineralized, it's very low level. The gold upgrade comes when the fluorite gets wiped out. So when it's replaced by silica.
Thanks, Mark. You mentioned doing some geophysics, looking for some of those veins. One of the earlier
Yandan?
What techniques were you considering?
We're still working our way through what's going to be most appropriate at Yandan. Probably something like MIMDAS, one of the variations on MIMDAS.